I'd like to introduce our first candidate of the day, Mr. Matthew Fayle.
Okay. Hi, my name is Matthew Fayle, and for my master's project, I rebuilt a scooter. Today I'll explain my process, give a brief history of internal combustion engines, and explain how they work. Ever since I was young, I've always had a fascination with motorized vehicles. From cars to dirt bikes to go-karts, I was always interested. When Masterworks came around, my uncle told me of a scooter that he had. It wasn't running, and had been left the elements for 5 years. He said that I could use it for my project, so I took his offer and set my goals on making it run. Before I explain the workings of the engine, I'll go over its past quickly. And since the history goes far back, I will only talk about the modern internal combustion engine. The first internal combustion engine was patented by Samuel Brown in 1823, and his design was compressionless and based on some of Leonardo da Vinci's work, which wasn't even up to date at the time. This allowed many designs to quickly overcome his, such as William Barnett's in-cylinder compression, which set the foundation for engines today. It consisted of the uses of compressing the fuel mixture in the power cylinder, which is now put into many of today's gas engines. After Barnett's patent, the early automobiles were possible. Carl Benz was the first to receive the patent for the gas-fueled automotive after patenting the first two-stroke engine and improving the current internal combustion engine to what was necessary for his automobile. Now I'll give a basic understanding of how the modern four-stroke engine works. This engine functions with a four-stroke cycle, hence the name. Every complete cycle is 2 revolutions of the crankshaft, 4 strokes of the piston, and one combustion. The 4 strokes are intake, power, compression, and exhaust. The intake stroke is the first stroke when the piston moves downward towards the crankshaft on the bottom of the cylinder and the intake valves are opened, letting in vaporized mixture of fuel and air, and the exhaust valves close at the same moment. Once revolving around the crank, the piston then moves up again for the compression stroke. Flywheel momentum, rotational force, sends the piston back to the top of the cylinder, compressing the fuel and air. Once the fuel is at maximum compression, the spark plug ignites the mixture. The burning fuel expands, driving the piston downward. This stroke is the one that drives the piston, thus keeping the cycle moving, while turning the crankshaft and generating power. The exhaust stroke is the last stroke, the one in which all of the excess fuel and burnt particles leave the chamber. A cam mechanism lifts open the exhaust valve at the top of the cylinder piston, and the force of the piston driving upwards pushes all of the exhaust out. This is when the intake valves open, just as the exhaust valves close. And then with the intake valves open, new air and fuel mixtures let in, and the cycle repeats itself. Originally, I was hoping that I would be able to get the scooter up to optimal running condition, possibly even add upgrades. Things like a new paint job, new body plastics, and shiny frame would have gone a long way to refurbish up the bike and add value to it. So my goal is to get it to selling condition if that were at all possible. Now I'll go over my process in rebuilding the scooter, starting from when I first got it. When I first picked up the scooter, it was not in good condition, but it wasn't horrible. I could tell work needed to be done and wasn't deterred. The components weren't looking too bad, but did have cobwebs, corrosion, and the like. Some of the bearings were seized up and not turning. The first step I had to take was to remove the plastics. This gave me access to the rest of the scooter, as well as ignition. Once I had the ignition out, I could get the key code and have a key cut. Once I had the plastics off, I could clean the bike. I pressure washed it to get rid of cobwebs, dirt, and anything else. Then I scrubbed it down with soap and warm water so that I could work on it. Then the first thing I had to do was take off the muffler before I could get to the engine. I had to remove the seat entirely, and then I had full access to the exhaust system. The muffler cage came off with 2 bolts, and the muffler came off with 1 bolt and an air seal. Now I could remove the rear shock, which came off at 2 points on the frame. This freed up the engine with 1 bolt left. The motor, swing arm, and wheel are all the same piece, which allows for quick disassembly. After removing the last bolt, I could take the engine off. Before doing this, however, first I need to disconnect the wiring and brake lines. Once I had done this and removed the engine from the cylinder, remove the engine from the bike, I had access to the cylinder, head, greads, and carburetor. Going straight to the cylinder, I removed the cylinder shroud, then the cylinder head. With the piston exposed, I took it off the connecting rod to get a better look at it. I took apart the manifold and reeds, and since the gaskets were not usable, I scraped them off and ordered new ones. The piston was covered in carbon buildup and needed to be cleaned well. The rings weren't in too bad condition, but I removed them anyways and ordered new ones. Because there was nothing I could do to the piston at the moment, I set it aside and began on the carburetor. I removed the carb without difficulty and scrubbed some dirt and grime off so that I wouldn't dirty up the engine and later cause problems. After taking it off, I immediately began disassembling the carb. I put all of the parts into my ultrasonic cleaner so that they were ready to be put back together. This I also did with the fuel pump and then the piston. Once I had the piston clean, I took it and the cylinder into Jeff's shop where he buffed both parts, making them usable. The cylinder, after being buffed, still had visible cross-hatchings, which was a good sign, meaning that I didn't have to replace it. At this point, I was ready to start reassembling the motor. Before I did this, I put the carb back together, installed it, and put the fuel pump in. I put the piston back onto the connecting rod inside of the cylinder, and the cylinder head on. I reinstalled the shroud, and then I could proceed with putting the engine onto the bike. So I put the engine back onto the scooter and installed the shock. I quickly hooked up the wiring, making sure that it was all connected properly. I put the brake lines back in place, and the scooter was ready. At this point, I tried starting the scooter, but it wouldn't work for some reason. So I took it into Jeff's shop, where he filled it up with gas and tried starting it. However, it wouldn't start the first time. So we sprayed ether, which is engine quick start, directly into the carburetor. This worked, and we got the scooter started for the first time. And then when I got home, I quickly cleaned out the fuel lines so that hopefully it would start without the ether. So I fixed the problem, and it did start. And here's a video of that taken at 10:30 at night. After getting the engine started, I quickly put 2 bolts on the seat, zip tied the battery in, and rode it out onto the street. So it was a little shaky. Here's another video. Throughout my Masterworks journey, I had many challenges and an equal amount of successes. When I first picked up the scooter, I was doubting whether I would actually be able to accomplish my goal. It seemed above my expertise and a requirement of knowledge that I didn't have. Once I had gone into the bike further, I realized how expensive this project was going to be. While not overly costly, it was beyond my budget. Every part that was not on the bike or looked like it needed to be replaced had to be bought. Small bolts and nuts were not a problem, but things like engine parts and gaskets were much more expensive. And then aside from cost, time was another problem in getting parts. Most of these had to be ordered through shops and would take time to arrive. This wasn't a huge problem, but while I was waiting, there wasn't a lot I could do. This slowed me down in the process and was one of the largest inconveniences. The difficulties of the actual work were definitely present, but not the greatest of my worries. Most of what needed to be done could be found in the service manual, which showed me how to do everything correctly and in detail. Other advice I could get from Jeff, whom I would constantly consult with. While this project had challenges and obstacles to get past, the rewards were worth it. When I first got the scooter running, I got a sense of completion and weight was lifted off my shoulders. Even though I was not yet finished, I now knew that I didn't have to go any further into the bike. I was afraid that if it didn't start, I would have to backtrack, and that would take much more time, possibly even making it an unfinishable project. My Masterworks has taught me a great deal about mechanics, from basic knowledge to hands-on experience. I'm now much more familiar with engines and the entire system that they encompass. Some of these things were quite simple, such as reading an assembly manual. While not at all complicated, familiarity is needed, and if a manual is misread, that could become a huge problem. Diagrams and everything used in manuals are important to understand because that is how someone would find out the exact specifications needed for some things. This is a circuit diagram with the scooter's wiring, and I hope that I'll never have to encounter grade 9 science again, but didn't happen. The biggest thing that I got from this project was familiarity with mechanics. Although the insight and experience gained was valuable, for me, it is even more important because of my interest in motocross bikes. I have much more confidence when dealing with engine work now and just working on mechanics in general. I'm pleased with what I gained coming out of my Masterworks project. The end results gave me a working scooter, a whole new skill set, and another experience. My project is finished with no more worries. The scooter is now operable, and I now feel that I'll be able to do the remaining work on it in order to bring it up to optimal running condition. I'm pleased with what I've accomplished. I can start the scooter, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, there's my scooter. The advisory committee that I had was excellent. I made everything possible and so much easier. I've gained much more confidence in basic motorcycle mechanics, but through working with Jeff, I've also reached a whole new respect for the expertise required of one of his level. I would not have accomplished what I did had it not been for Jeff's support and aid. Whenever I ran into a problem, he could sort it out for me. And another major portion of this project was the written part, which Adrian made possible. He did an extraordinary job of coordinating everything throughout the year, keeping me on track, and helping me greatly with my paper. My father also helped me a great deal, facilitating external events for me, and giving advice and help in the garage. With that said, I could not have done this without my advisors. Thank you all very much.
On behalf of Island Pacific School, I'm very pleased to announce that Mr. Matthew Fayle has now completed all the requirements of his master's.